Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the first webinar in the new series, the autumn series of the Serviced Apartment News webinars. Today, we are going to be discussing the value of a brand in the extended stay and serviced apartment sector. My name is George Sell. I'm Editor-in-Chief at International Hospitality Media, the publisher of Serviced Apartment News, and we publish online B2B news websites for the hospitality and real estate sectors, and we are also events and awards organisers. So these Serviced Apartment News webinars are sponsored by IMS and by Corporate Housing Factory, and we're just going to find some more out about those guys. We're going to see a quick video about IMS, and you'll also be able to see how to contact them in the chat. Okay, thank you to IMS, and we're also going to find out a little bit more about Corporate Housing Factory.
We are Corporate Housing Factory, your go-to company for booking temporary and extended stays in the Netherlands. Let me tell you what we do. We have about 200 serviced apartments in the Netherlands in all major cities. Big, small, luxurious, minimalistic, modern and cosy. Our apartments are always fully furnished, weekly cleaned, provided with super speed internet, and we can offer an airport pick-up or drop-off too. Now, tell us what type of apartment you're looking for.
So thank you to our sponsors. As I mentioned, you can see how to contact them in the chat. The webinar is going to last for an hour. We're going to have around 45 minutes of panel discussion, followed by some Q&A at the end. We'd like to make it as interactive as possible, so if you do have any questions, please do submit them using either the chat or the Q&A function in Zoom. And a recording of the session will be sent via email to everyone who registered over the next few days. Just wanted to show, for the sake of some context, some screen grabs from stories we've run on Serviced Apartment News about brands in the sector. As you can see on the left there, Cheval Collection has launched a new brand, which we'll find out more about from Daniel shortly. Dorset's launched its Dow apart hotel brand. In the extended stay sector in the US, we've seen Project Echo from Wyndham and various others. The dual branded hotel project is quite big in this sector, usually has an extended stay element. Eden's Lock brand has been one of the most prominent in the sector. We've seen that grow strongly even throughout the pandemic. And also some of the big hotel chains that are adding an apartment element to their established hotel brands, such as the Novotel Living brand there from Aycock. So we've got a terrific panel here today, loads of expertise and all coming from to the subject from a slightly different angle. And I'm going to ask the guys to introduce themselves in turn, and we'll go from left to right as we see them on the screen. So if I could start with you, Deepesh, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, thanks, George. Hi, I'm Deepesh. I've been with the bank for nearly 8 years. The bank's relatively new. We got a banking license 7 years ago, and during that period, we've lent just under £9 billion, with about 1.5 to 2 billion in the hospitality sector, which includes service departments.
Thanks, Deepesh. And Daniel, welcome to you.
Afternoon, George. So I head up development at Cheval Collection. Cheval Collection is a service department operator. We have 3 brands, 12 properties in operation across London and Edinburgh, and with some more in the pipeline. Our structure is a management agreement, although we also own, and last year we announced a JV on one of the projects. Central office in London, and very ambitious plans to grow over the next few years.
Thank you, Daniel. And Emily, good afternoon to you.
Hello, thank you very much. It is all true what is written there. I'm the co-founder, one of the co-founders of NewDog PR. We are a strategic PR business for the hotels and service department sectors, and we have a focus on the investment part of that life. Previously, but still within the sector, it's quite hard to leave once you're in. I've worked with operators, charities, not-for-profits, event companies on their marketing and branding activities.
Great, thank you, Emily. George, good afternoon to you.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. George Panayiotou, Director Panayiotou Capital. We are predominantly a hotel investor across various operating platforms as well as asset-backed opportunities as well.
Thank you, George. And finally, Sam, welcome to you.
Afternoon, George. Afternoon, all. Sam Aycock, coming from Hines, Senior Associate on our European Living team. We sit in London, but work with each of the various country teams across Europe. I think historically, it's been more of a build-to-rent student housing focus from an investment development standpoint, but increasingly becoming more focused on service department and hospitality sector.
Great stuff. Thank you, Sam. Thank you all for your time today. So today's session is looking at the value of a brand in the extended stay and service department sector. Brands in the hotel sector broadly is quite an interesting topic because they don't serve the same purpose as a lot of other consumer brands. If you look at some of the major hotel companies, Wyndham's got 23 brands, Marriott's got 30, Accor's got 54. Now, quite a few of those are well known and well recognized by the general public, but a whole load of them wouldn't be as well. But they keep launching them for various strategic reasons. And I'm just wondering how important you guys think a brand is specifically in the extended stay and service department sector compared with other areas of hospitality. I'm going to start with you, Deepesh, on that one.
Thanks, George. Yeah, so I guess from a lender's perspective, what we're really looking at is the experience for the consumer. And I think with that, when you have a brand or a number of sites which has one brand, you see consistency, and I think that's typically what they're going to be looking for when they're looking to stay somewhere. And I think that alongside location and where the brands are located will drive consumers to stay with a specific brand. And I think moving over from a lender's perspective, what we're thinking about also is what that does for your buying power. So given what's happening with various forms of inflationary costs and energy costs and staff inflation, you'll start to see brands being able to either work together and have the ability to either hedge or fix their long-term costs on an ongoing basis. So that's really how I'm looking at it. But we're not necessarily focused solely on brands. For us, it's all about the quality of the management and the consumer experience.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Deepesh. Emily, you're coming from a marketing and branding background, and you've seen the kind of conveyor belt of hotel brand launches over the last few years. Is there a difference in how significant having a brand is in the extended stay and service department sector compared with the broader hotel industry?
It's a good question, a good one to kick off with. I think, as you mentioned, there are at last count 5 billion hotel brands, and even I challenged most of the board members to, in fact, I was at an event once where one of the board members was asked to name all the brands within their family and their brand family, and they couldn't do it, which is a slightly tricky PR moment. But moving on, I think possibly more, at the stage that the service department sector is, it is possibly more so because it's, before the pandemic, it was relatively unknown by and this comes back to the question that we ask ourselves all the time: who ultimately is the customer? Is it the investor, or is it the guest that sleeps in these accommodations? But either which way, I think the sector was less well known before the pandemic, and then the pandemic came along. We realised we didn't really want to share other people's germs, and this type of accommodation was a great way to enable us to do that. And therefore, it increased its awareness within both the guests' mind and also the investors. And as where we are at this stage in its life cycle, I would suggest, and I don't think there's a right or a wrong answer to this, but I would suggest that probably a brand is important, because we know that brands act as signposts for consumers, and whether that be the investor or the guest, they are useful.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Emily. George, as a hotel investor, do you see a difference in how important a brand is in this particular area compared with the broader hospitality industry?
Yeah, look, I think what's really critical when you're trying to decide ultimately if an asset should be branded or unbranded, if you like, I think comes down to expectation, really. And any investor looking at a potential asset to brand, the first thing you've really got to be doing, I think, is really understanding what you're trying to do. You know, what does success look like for you? And then ultimately, it's really understanding what the specific brand itself stands for, because what you find a lot of time, there can usually be frustration between investor and brand, where investor could be trying to change brand standards, or, you know, they've got a different take on what they believe the brand should be doing for the specific asset. So I think, you know, that alignment is absolutely key. You know, we've spoken about many times how many brands there now is. So I think the alignment between investor and brand needs to be really well thought out before you decide to brand an asset or not, because it is, you know, it's a very long journey together.
Yeah, thank you, George. Sam, Hines has recently bought service departments in Italy, which I believe are unbranded at this stage, and you're also involved with a mixed-use project in Milan where there are going to be service departments, and you've chosen to go with the Adagio brand there. So what is the decision-making process there, and how do you decide whether to brand an asset or leave it unbranded?
Sure. Yeah, I think wearing the investor hat, it's kind of first things first is making sure the business plan works, right? And so that's kind of the key focus, is how do we make sure the business plan is successful? And similar to what George said, I think it's alignment of the brand to the business plan, and sometimes this may mean not being branded at all. Other times may mean needing a brand, and I think a good example is destination. Where is it located? Because sometimes the location itself may be a brand in itself, and you don't actually need to go out and get a brand to create a destination. So I think the one that you mentioned, it's a little bit outside of Milan. It's not known as you know, maybe one of our more well-known iconic buildings in another city that could stand for a brand in itself. And so at this point in time, we needed to go out and find somebody to kind of fit the profile and make sure it was creating a brand rather than the asset speaking for itself. So I think the big piece is making sure the brand is aligned with the business plan first, and whether that means branded or unbranded. That's kind of the first question we're asking, and then secondly, it's where's the location and which one of these brands is going to fit best.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Sam. Daniel, do you think the importance of a brand is growing as the sector evolves? I mean, traditionally, a lot of service department inventory was unbranded. It was for the business customer, and it ticked along very nicely. And a brand didn't seem all that important, but there's a lot more focus on it now. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think just about it being important or not, I think it's very important. But I also think there's an opportunity for the service department sector. So, I mean, just to elaborate a bit on that and branding, sort of, I think a brand is important in whatever you do. Everyone has a brand. There's a lot of research that basically shows that brand value matters. People prefer a credible, reputable brand rather than nothing at all. But that doesn't mean that I sort of personally think that it has to be the largest brand, like one of the big 4 or 5 or 6 brands that we talked about or alluded to, because they have a little bit less relevance perhaps today when it comes to the guest choosing where to stay. And we know some of these brands are also buying up some of these entrepreneurial lifestyle brands because that's what people are looking for. They're looking for individuality. Specifically for the service department, sort of extended stay side, I think that's just a big, huge opportunity to have the well-recognized brand, because there are a lot of individual properties out there. They do okay, but they could do a lot better with a brand. So obviously it's not just the brand name, the logo and so on, but it's kind of the structure behind it in order to be able to deliver consistency, quality, recognition, and all of those good things. So it's maybe not more important for our sector, but there is a greater opportunity.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Daniel. George, if you decide to brand a property, what are you expecting that brand to deliver to justify the cost? And how do you go about choosing between the brands who are in the running?
Okay, well, I have to proclaim that I've got a lot more experience in, the hotel sector than the service department sector on that. But, we are looking at a few of the new service longer stay brands. But for me, I'm expecting ultimately it's loyalty, right? So when I think of what a brand is in whatever sector, even not in real estate, it's ultimately about loyalty of customer, because I think since the OTAs have come along, what I've seen is everyone seems to be loyal to price now and not necessarily loyal to brand anymore. So, brands are having to work a lot harder today. But in terms of what I expect, I think it's loyalty, it's standards, and service. So, when we talk about standards, it's really down to, the strength of these brand standards. So, how far is a brand going to move in terms of their brand standards? And sometimes, brands can be extremely rigid for all the wrong reasons, because I believe, there is growth in all of these brands in different markets, different assets. So it's not, a completely cookie cutter approach, but in terms of what I expect, ultimately it's loyalty, service, and it's a rate premium ultimately to my top line to justify the cost of putting a brand in.
Mm-hmm. Sam, what's your take on that one? And a sort of additional element to that question: does a brand have to be particularly established or of a certain size for you to opt with it, or would you go for a startup if it attracted you and ticked the right boxes?
Maybe just the quick answer towards the last one. Yes, would go with the startup if it ticked the boxes and yeah. And I mean, I think ultimately back to the point I made is if whatever's going to be best for the business plan, right? I think the first thing first is working with whatever brand we choose to make sure we're aligned in what's the spec, what's the design, what's the fit out, what do we actually need to deliver in order to hit the vision, the success criteria for the specific brand. And I think once you kind of agree on this is what's needed in order to deliver whatever the product is that you're both kind of out seeking for, then it's a matter of making sure that whatever costs are implemented are justified through some sort of value add, right? And I think you want to make sure that whatever costs are going into it do have a specific reason, do have a specific value add towards the overall project. I think with that said, there needs to be some flexibility, right? And making sure that you're not too hard on one side or the other, to make sure that there is flexibility in what the brand vision is throughout kind of the design process. So I think it's as George mentioned, loyalty, making sure that you are connected and well communicated as you go through the process, so that there's not any surprises throughout the design. But I think we would definitely explore and be open to smaller brands if that is something that's needed for the project. I think, for example, in some of our projects, if it's a local player, that may fit better in a Milan context than something that's more universally known. So, yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit about the process of how you actually select a brand and how brands express interest to you? I mean, how does the selection process actually work?
And typically, the selection process will be run from within our specific country teams, whoever has the project. But in some instances, it's been using brokers to go out and help with the selection process. But one of the big questions is who's the investor behind it, and what is their strategy? Because in certain cases, that may be a big piece as to how do they actually want to look at the operational strategy. Are they looking for a management contract or looking for a lease contract? And so I think that's one element that comes into play on top of kind of the pieces that I'd said earlier, as to making sure we're marrying the project, whether it's mixed use or single residential, to kind of the wider business plan.
Yeah. Okay. So a brand that's flexible enough to offer management contracts and leases, a variety, is more likely to get the gig than the one that's rigidly set in its structures. Then,
depending on the investor, I think that's it could go either direction there.
Yeah. Okay. And George, does that tally with your experience and how you go about selecting a brand, or does the process work differently with you?
Yeah, just I think I mirror exactly what Sam's saying there, and it really is down to alignment and expectation. So it's, what does success look like for you in your business plan? Because you could have a really unrealistic business plan, and then all of a sudden fingers get pointed at the brand that they're doing a bad job. But then, I don't think that's necessarily fair. So, as Sam was saying, it's, let's try and find the right brand for this location to make this business plan make sense. So, yeah, I definitely do agree with that.
Emily, did you want to come in on that point?
I just think it would be slightly remiss of us at this stage, when we're talking about what our expectations are from a brand, not to mention reputational elements. We can all cast our minds back to the PR catastrophe that has been Center Parcs over the last few weeks, and as not even weeks, it feels like weeks, it's just been days, and as jolly as that's been, it's the brand that are taking the hit there, and refer back to IHG's recent data breach and Marriott Starwood. It's the brand that takes the kind of flack for that, and I appreciate that's not the primary reason that people go into branded relationships, but I do think it's the reputational element is perhaps worth pointing out at this point in the discussion.
Okay, thanks, Emily. Daniel, from a brand's perspective or an operator's perspective, how and why do you decide to launch new brands? So what for example, what were the drivers between the launch of Milo Canda and Cheval Maison a little bit before that?
Well, are you asking whether, or sort of why we are launching a new brand?
Yeah, I mean, were these launched in response to owner interest, or is this an idea that's been generated internally that you think will be attractive to owners, or a bit of both? How did the process work?
Yeah, no, I mean, in our case, we created this brand to widen our offering, and it wasn't just for developers, but also for our customer and database. And we saw a real opportunity. So just the idea of having this new brand had been in the making for a long time, and then we had also secured the first project for that brand, and I think that's the perfect timing then to also launch the brand. And there are lots of reasons why companies launch brands. Some of the some actually may have actually territorial restrictions. So they need to come up with new brand offerings along the way to then enable further growth in certain key locations. But for us, it was to widen the breadth of our offering from luxury to something with flexibility and something completely new, which was a bit of a departure from our existing portfolio as well. So we just thought the timing was absolutely right to do that now. So that, you know, the other brands also feel there's competition, they don't want to lose market share and so on. It wasn't necessarily our reason. We wanted just to widen the offering and we saw the opportunity.
And how did you test the concept that you thought was a good idea? Did you go and canvass a selection of owners and developers and see if they thought you were along the right lines, or did you just just back your hunch and go with it?
Well, no. We had definitely researched and we worked with architects and on costings and everything. But it was also the number of requests for specific projects that could fit that particular model.
Yeah.
It was outweighing what we could do with what is quite an expensive product in our Cheval residence offering. And this was perfect not only for the times we're in, there is a more affordable entry point on the development costs, but also as a price point. So for all those reasons, we thought it was the right time.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Daniel. Emily, you've got your hand up there.
Oh, I hadn't. Maybe that was from before.
Oh, okay. That's weird. That should have come down.
I will lower my hand now digitally, and you please carry on.
Okay, will do.
There you go.
So traditionally, the business traveller has been the core audience for this sector. Obviously, that is evolving as we've got more recognition in the pandemic, and the self-contained nature of the product has become more appealing. How important are brands to business travellers as opposed to leisure travellers? We'll drill down in a minute to talk about the various channels that business travellers come through. Let me stick with you for a minute there, Daniel, as the operator here. Do you think brands are as significant to business travellers as they are to somebody booking a weekend away, a city break or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, it used to be that the business traveller, it used to be vital to have a brand, almost like, is there a Hilton in town? It gave a reassurance that you would be safe, a clean bed, and everything would work. I think perhaps it's a little less important today because the business traveller has also changed a bit. You might stay in a place for longer. You might want to mix it up with adding a day or two for leisure or bring family. And obviously, you can find places so much easier online. That was obviously a game changer. So I think a large proportion of business travelers want somewhere where they can work, but they're also often looking for a very cool place to stay, or like in our case, to have a bit more space. So that space for the traditional 4-star hotel, pure for business, has maybe had its best day because there's so much other great offering and cool places to go and you can find them online. So I think it's just the type of brand a business traveler is looking for today has changed. And we have obviously a large portion of business travel, but that guest is not behaving like a typical business traveler leaving in the morning, coming back. It's they're using the apartments, they're using the property in a different way.
And when you're getting requests from TMCs and service department agents and so on, do you think they are placing more emphasis on that than they used to?
I'm not personally close to that side of the business, but what I do know they do. I mean, the product for that agent is key and they'll come to visit. So obviously there is an edge and there's an advantage if they're familiar with the brand and they know what you can deliver. But with any agent and so on, and what we work on constantly is building and keeping that relationship, because it is certainly a people business. And if you've got those strong relationships, those agents will work for you.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Daniel. We probably should address the elephant in the room here. And I know the situation is improving, but how much consumer recognition is there actually of brands in this space? We went out on the street and did some Vox Pop videos a few years ago in advance of one of our service department summits, and polled quite a few people on the streets of London and asked them if they could name any service department brands. I think out of between 20 and 30 we spoke to, one person mentioned Ascot, 5 mentioned Airbnb, which was not really the answer we were looking for, and nobody else knew a brand at all. I've got a hunch that has changed a bit, but what do you guys think? Deepesh, do you want to pick up on that?
Interestingly, a couple of months ago, I stayed in Manchester. We've got an office in Manchester, and we made a point of staying at the Stay City there, who are also a client. We were keen to try out the product. And off the back of staying there for 4 nights, I came out saying to our PAs that actually now whenever we travel, we really want to stay in a Stay City, because the kitchenette is very, very handy just to be able to do whatever you need to do if you're in and out of the office. But moreover, having a separate room or a separate living room within a larger unit actually does feel like a little bit like a home away from home, and you're not just stuck in a bedroom. And when you're traveling for business, it's typically for, you're only staying there for sleeping. But if you're staying for 3-4 nights, you tend to going to have some kind of amount of time in the room. So having a larger unit and a kitchenette and a separate living room, and something that's relatively new, as most service departments are, actually, from my perspective, and I'm thinking from a business traveler's perspective and a consumer, it's quite powerful. And now whenever we're going, I'm going to Marseille in a couple of months, and actually we just made a point of staying in the Stay City, because you know what you're getting, and it's reasonable as long as it's not massively out of kilter. And from our perspective, what we're saying is, if we can have a few brands that we know and we like, and we can agree a price with them, we'll just stick to those brands. Yeah,
I think it's quite a common experience that you described, that once people actually use a service department or a part hotel, they often don't want to go back to a hotel room. It's getting them through the door in the first place. And Stay City are good at that, actually, and they do have a fairly recognizable brand. Daniel, did you want to come in on that topic?
Well, I just wanted to add, it's maybe obvious, but there wasn't a lot of great product out there for a long time. So it will continue to evolve. We'll continue to create more awareness with more great product out in the market, because it was kind of way down on the pecking order of what you would choose when you were booking. So I actually think sort of good, healthy competition out there with more great product coming out.
Yeah.
And actually, sorry to jump in, there's lessons to be learned, aren't there, from the wider hotel sector here by flooding the market with too many brands? Because we know research tells us conclusively that actually too much choice doesn't enable the consumer in a positive way. It confuses them, and they then resort to the intermediaries like booking.com because then they can just sort by location or rate. So actually the service department sector has an opportunity here to provide decent brand standards, regular business, and build loyalty without flooding the market with too many brands, and then no one knows what they're doing.
George, what's your take on how much consumer recognition there is in the service department sector compared with broader hospitality?
I just think it's down to the size of the market, right? So ultimately, there is that many more hotel brands because of the size of the market, and I think there's a huge opportunity in the service department sector from a branding perspective. Certainly from a hotel perspective, I believe it is oversaturated. I've had occasions in, for example, our Hampton by Hilton at Luton Airport, where people would walk through the door and say to us, where is the swimming pool and where is the restaurant? And you're almost educating people into the fact that, well, this is a Hampton by Hilton. It's not a full service Hilton. It's a limited service product. And we don't have all of those facilities. So, there is, in the hotel section, definitely there still is a huge messaging to the consumer that needs to happen. But the opportunity is definitely in the service department sector going forward, for sure.
Thanks, George. One thing we haven't seen too much of in this sector so far are loyalty programs, which obviously are a huge driver for business travel to the big hotel chains. There have been one or two launched. I think Rooms launched one last year. There have been a few more. Is that simply because we're at an early stage in the evolution of the sector, or do you think we'll see more of those? Sam, do you want to pick up on that one first?
Sure. Yeah, I don't have a great answer for this one, honestly. I think it's I think it's one of those things, like you said, business travelers. Business travelers wants the convenience, location, and that's kind of what they're driving. I think the loyalty programs are appeal to business travelers who are more frequently traveling a bit more. I think there's some of these hotel brands that have a spin-off of the service department concept that are doing loyalty programs, trying to capture that audience now, and probably will see it a bit more. But may just be that it's not quite as progressed as some of the hotel brands, as to why you're not seeing it as much at this point.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Sam. Daniel, is a loyalty program something you would consider at Cheval when the new brands take off a bit, something across the three brands you have?
The mute and unmute. Yes, definitely. I mean, we are exploring loyalty scheme options right now because we're growing. So we want to be able to offer something that is considered and that can be useful, and that you can actually get access to discounts and access to things that you maybe wouldn't. And I looked into, because we've gone through this process, the team has looked into, who else has got things, whether they're just a members club or access to discounts and so on. And actually, we found quite a few in our space, whether it's Eden or Ascot or Fraser. They all have something going on. Ascot's reward scheme is fairly extensive. You have different categories and so on. But I also believe Stay City, Wyndham, and obviously anyone attached to a hotel group, they have it automatically. So there are quite a few that do it. I think just why it hasn't been there before is probably, part of it, maybe it sounded a bit arrogant, but it wasn't needed as much because the channels were a bit different. So for the longest stay customer, you were going through agents, you were going through in a different way. But for a short stay product, and if you want offering a brand variety, we feel we are at the point where we should have something.
Do you think there is the potential to engender more brand loyalty in the extended stay sector than in the broader hotel sector? Because it's somewhere you potentially stay more often, you stay for longer, you have much more of a interaction with the product. Do you think actually this could be an advantage of the sector compared with the competition?
I mean, we've had loyalty for a long time within our portfolio. So, and because we don't have a loyalty program, it doesn't mean we're not looking after the guests. There is autonomy within each property and the general managers and the operations team to look after those guests that are coming again and visiting again, whether it's gifts, upgrades, and just looking after them. So there's always been a service element of looking after guests. But so you have to therefore think about what you're going to actually offer beyond that when you do a loyalty scheme. And it has to be some way of discounts or ability to get news or insight to things before everyone else does.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Daniel. We've got some good questions coming in from the audience, which we'll get around to shortly, but I just want to speak to Deepesh a bit about the lender's perspective on all of this. So Deepesh, how significant is the presence of a brand to a lender when assessing development finance, for example, for a new project?
I think there's a few things to consider, and as I alluded to earlier on, for us, the primary thing we're looking at is quality of management, and really how they've fared over the COVID period, and given the times we're in now, how they're managing various costs and inflationary pressures. So I think that's the primary thing we're looking at. Moving on to the brand, I think it's a case of it's all going to come down to location. So if you're in the centre of London, a brand, and again, it depends which part of the centre of London, is a brand as important as if you were on the outskirts of the, say, M25? I think it will play a big part in what you're looking to do. We wouldn't necessarily push a specific client into a specific brand, but what we would do is account for the fact that if they do have a brand, you're going to get relatively immediate revenue from the fact that you've got a well-recognized brand, and therefore some kind of customer loyalty or some kind of presence in the UK or not, whether that's in Europe. So I think there's various things to think about. We're not necessarily swayed towards doing a deal or not doing a deal, but it will help us with our decision making if there is a brand, and also depending on what brand. So if you're going for a Holiday Inn Express, for example, I'm just thinking more hotels. If you're going for a Holiday Inn Express, for example, you know the type of product and the type of average fees you're going to be achieving on that specific hotel. So you need to be looking at, is there a market for that type of product in that location? And equally, if you're at the higher end, if you're at £800-900 a night, it needs to be a very unique brand, or a brand that's well recognized, that we're seeing perhaps one or two in every major city around the world. So I think there's a variation of factors. Like I say, what I would say, we're not necessarily brand focused. It's horses for courses. So it really depends on what they're looking to achieve. When we did the Stay City deal, and we've just done another deal for them very recently, when we did that, we were very aware that this is a well-known, well-trodden, good brand across Europe, not just the UK. Yeah. And therefore, as a business, we were really keen on working with, and having understood what their customer base looks like, it did appear that they had good loyalty from both consumers and from corporates. Yeah.
And does your level of involvement in the potential selection of a brand vary according to the client? Like, would some developers come to you and say, "This is what we've got in mind. Who do you think we should choose to operate it?"
Yeah, and obviously, as we've done many different types of hospitality deals, we're connected in terms of who's doing what and who to speak to. So we'll be able to introduce people to the relevant brands as and when necessary. Actually, vice versa. So we recently had an intro from Aycock for a client that they were looking to build a hotel in St Paul's, and you'll see it in the press. But they introduced us, and they weren't necessarily going with Aycock, but hopefully they will. Would you assist with funding the acquisition or the development of the hotel? To which we ended up doing, and they ended up staying with Aycock, despite having a few other offers from a few other brands. But we're, like I say, we're not going to be a driver. We'll have an open discussion around what we may think is the right thing to do.
Great stuff. Thank you, Deepesh. Okay, let's get on to some questions from the audience here. We've got some good ones. I'm going to start with one here from Richard Mayuski. Hello, Richard. Good afternoon. If we split the market into three segments, leisure, contractor, and corporate, can one brand name work across all three? Daniel, would you like to pick up on that one first?
Of course we can.
Would you care to elaborate?
No, I mean, I'll just take the Cheval collection as an example. There's different types of business depending on the time of year. So in the summer, for our portfolio with a lot of properties around the Kensington area, we have a very strong Middle Eastern following that like that type of accommodation in that area of London. So, but that's majority leisure. And then if I take Edinburgh as an example, we have quite a variety, but again, the summer is majority focused around leisure, and then you have weekend business, and when there are events on, and you have some corporates, film crews, and all kinds. So I think the product itself lends itself to all categories of those wanting to stay on leisure or business, or for almost any reason. So I don't know if that answers the question, but the product itself provides the ability for all those sections. And then it just comes down to some of what we talked about today. Where are you located? Because that's obviously going to be a huge factor.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Daniel. James Fry has asked a question. great brands in the hospitality sector drive direct bookings, returning guests, and higher ADRs. Who is achieving this best in the service department and apart hotel sector, and what are they doing differently to achieve this? This is where I'm going to have to ask some of you to nail your colours to the last. But Sam, are there any brands that you think are?
I mean, you have to say Cheval, right? That's the one that's that's doing it all. No, I mean, I think for us, Cheval's one that, you know, Daniel and I have spoken a number of times, and I think they're one of the more well-recognized brands out there. Ascot, Accor, there's a few local players in Italy that we've spoken with as well. One of our projects in the fashion district of Milan is with a group called JK Place, and it's a little bit of a smaller format hotel service department brand, 40 units, and they're more local to the Italian market. So I think those are kind of the top ones that come to mind. But like we've said kind of throughout the day, there's a lot of brands out there. So
yeah, okay, thanks, Sam. And George, as you said, you're moving into this space from a hotel background, but which brands in the extended stay sector have caught your eye, and what is it that you like about them?
Just like what Lock do, I think is very cool. You know, they are obviously they're very design led, but I think, you know, from a marketing, a branding perspective, they give the consumer something very different to the other brands, really. So yeah, I kind of really like what those guys are up to, and you know how they're evolving the brands and the locations they're going into says a lot. I think you always need to watch the locational growth of brands in the early days, because it usually tells you a lot about where they're trying to take the business. So yeah.
Yeah, I think the rollout of Lock, even during the pandemic, was really impressive. It's definitely one of the in a short space of time, it's become one of the more high profile brands in the space. Emily, who do you like?
Cheval, obviously. I think it's interesting we follow the investor activity because that's the nature that we're coming at. So whatever the specific brands are, we would look at it from, you know, where the investment's going, why the investment's going there. I will continue to hammer my point as to who the customer is here, whether it's the guest or the investor, but just sort of monitoring that investment activity leads us to review and see which brands are sort of prominent, growing, very active. That was suitably kind of neutral response, I think.
Yeah. I didn't expect you to actually nominate. Deepesh, maybe you might be a bit braver than Emily was.
It's difficult. I obviously only see information that I've got access to via our own clients, but there's no doubt the Eden and the Lock brand have done phenomenally well. They've had heavy investment from their owners, and they've built a very good business. And not just that, I think they've actually got a very strong management team in there as well. So some of the guys who have actually been in banking and have now gone on to help run this business, you know, they've got a very lean operation with a lot of money supporting them in their growth. And I'll go back again to Stay City just because great client of ours and I think run a very good business. And again, with the consistency, you know what you're getting.
Yeah, thanks, Deepesh. I just want to go back to one of the points of James's question earlier, which is that great brands drive higher ADRs. Sam, what would you envisage would be the ADR increase that a strong brand could deliver? Obviously, it's location specific, but is there a kind of ballpark figure that you would be looking for to justify the extra costs involved in appointing a brand?
No, I don't have a great answer for that one. I think a lot of factors go into it, right? And I think it's more operationally that's kind of where you're going to see some of the uptick in brand and who is doing the operations right, who delivers something that wants that end user to come back and keep keep staying there, because I think that's what the operations and who delivers the best services is what's going to keep the consumer coming back. So I don't know exactly what the figure would be that would be some percentage increase in having a brand on there, but yeah, I think it's who does the operations, right?
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's flip that on its head and ask Daniel, what ADR increase do you think you could drive with one of your brands as opposed to if the same property was operated unbranded?
Well, I don't quite dare to put a percentage on it, but I think when choosing any brand, as what we've said today, it's really important to do your due diligence and do a careful analysis, because you've got to pick the right brand for the right location. But in order to justify any kind of fees for any brand that is charging for anything, you need to deliver obviously a few key elements. You need to drive sales. You need to add a premium to the ADR that you would have not had without that brand, because there are also other costs around choosing a brand in the first place. That brand may say, we need these standards, these number of staff, these amenities, these systems, so that's going to cost you. You've got to be able to demonstrate, at least when you're in real negotiations, that you can show the owner a better bottom line. So the profits need to be better. And hopefully, obviously, you choose a brand that can put the right systems and processes in place. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the previous discussion we had about who drives the best ADR and so on is actually, for London, we don't have a direct comparable. I'm sure there are in other parts of the world, but it's quite interesting. There isn't a lot in that high-end space where Cheval residences sit. So we actually have to compare on SDR and so on with some of the absolute luxury hotels, be it the Mandarin or Bulgari or Four Seasons, because otherwise it's not quite comparable. But they've got a lot of other great brands, and for my Lacanda, we're certainly keeping an eye on what Lock and Soku and City ID and so on are getting up to, because it's in that space.
Yeah. One of the things that Richard has alluded to in a question here is about the hotel groups such as Marriott that have a real proliferation of brands under the same umbrella. And I do remember shortly after Brookfield bought Eden, or Seiko as it was then, when Stephen Hansen was there, and he said he could see the potential for 6 or 7 brands all under the same umbrella. Do you think that's something that Cheval might reach one day? Have you got more brands up your sleeve, or will you stick with the ones you have for now?
We're definitely sticking to what we have now. In our opinion, we think we now have 3 great offerings that are clearly defined. But yeah, I couldn't say never. I'm sure there will be another brand at some point. But they take time to get right. So we don't have anything up our sleeve just yet. Yeah.
Okay. And the actual process of devising a new brand, who is the key team involved? Obviously, you're on the development side. You've got the marketing guys, the finance guys. How did the process work internally?
Well, so actually, I was very much part of it, but we had all key stakeholders in the team having some input, and then in order to add another layer to it, we chose an architect practice, like Gensler in this case, that we could work alongside with, and then we had cost consultants on the other, and we could just look at how an apartment could look like, layouts, best use of space, and we really tried to come up and work hard on what that DNA of the brand was and the type of guest, profiling it and so on. So there are a lot of elements, but I think all key stakeholders within the team were all needed.
Yeah, great stuff. Thank you, Daniel. And thank you all for your contributions today. I think it's been a really interesting session. I'm just going to show you a few slides before we wrap up at 3. And just to let you know that as you can see, there's quite a lot of information in the chat there for you to take notes from if you so wish, including the LinkedIn profiles of our panelists. So I'd encourage you to contact with them and carry on the conversation. But we're going to leave the session open for a couple of minutes after we end, so you can take some notes from all the info in there. Okay, so our next Service Department News webinar is on September the 29th. It's called New Kids on the Block, and it's a kind of related topic today, actually. We're going to be speaking to 3 new brands in the space, and we're going to talk to them about why they launched, how they launched, and the challenges and opportunities they are facing launching at this very particular time in the hospitality industry. There is a link to register for that session in the chat, and that's on September the 29th. If you'd like to work with us, whether it's sponsoring webinars, speaking at any of our events, please do get in touch with my colleague Katie, whose details are on the screen there, and also in the chat. If you are on any of the social channels that you can see on there, do give us a follow and interact with us if you're not doing so already. We're pretty active on all those channels. Thanks to Corporate Housing Factory and to IMS for sponsoring today. Thanks to Daniel, to Sam, to Emily, to Deepesh, and to George for their contributions. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you on the next webinar. Enjoy your weekends, everyone.